Hello, and welcome to the CHRO South Africa webinar, where today we'll be discussing how to retrench in tough times. My name is Sungulan Kabinde, and I am the managing editor of the CHRO website and magazine. And today we'll be focusing on the challenges that HR leaders are facing when their organizations have undertaken to retrench workers, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Media reports are awash with companies initiating Section 189A processes, beginning consultations to retrench employees en masse. And according to the National Income Dynamics Coronavirus Rapid Mobile Survey, approximately 3 million people have lost their jobs, representing an 18% decline in employment, from 17 million people in February to 14 million people employed by the end of April. So that just shows the extent of destruction that this virus has done from a jobs perspective. Our panelists today are A.B. Kotle, who's the Executive Director of HR at Mercedes-Benz, South Africa. He will advise on how to handle retrenchments delicately and bring stakeholders together in an effort to find a solution that all involved parties can accept. We also have Johan Bottas, who heads the Baker McKenzie's Employment Practice Group in Johannesburg. Johan regularly advises multinational clients on industrial relations, employment negotiations, labor dispute resolution, change management, and organizational restructuring. So he's the expert we'll be looking to provide guidance in terms of what are the legal requirements for following this due process of retrenching employees. Lastly, we were meant to have Joseph Muntisetse from National Union of Mine Workers to provide the union perspective. However, Joseph had some technical difficulties with the webinar platform. And what we've done instead is we have done a Zoom call with him, which I will play. It's about 15 minutes long. So during the course of the webinar, I'll play that for everyone, and we'll still get that union view. So without further ado, I think it's time for us to get started. And Johan, today's topic is a very controversial one, because on one hand, companies are facing the very real threat of survival with the national lockdown and economic slowdown impacting revenues and cash flow quite significantly. On the other hand, you have real bread and butter issues of people struggling to feed their families if they lose their work. Can you give us a context around the legislative environment, both locally and abroad, when it comes to the way companies are responding to this pandemic?
Sure, with the greatest pleasure, and thank you very much for the invite. And I'm really pleased to be on this panel and to be sharing some thoughts with the viewers and the listeners. So, as far as this process and where we are is concerned, I mean, we've got these conflicting needs and requirements. Where on the one hand, we as a nation, as a race, we are desperately trying to ensure survival, not only from a physical perspective, but from a financial perspective as well, with so many people being affected in a country like ours that is ravished with joblessness, where we, prior to the pandemic, we had an official unemployment rate of 27%. It's gone up to 31% already, with the Minister of Labour, prophesizing that unless we do something dramatic, we can end up between 41 and 54% unemployment rate, at the end of the pandemic. Now, I mean, that is just, the mind boggles if you think that, in a country where so many people don't have jobs at the moment, if 1 out of every 2 people are going to be out of a job, where we don't have work for them. And it's unbelievable to think as to what the financial and human impact of that's going to be. But as you correctly say, so you've got those concerns as to how do we deal with it, how do we protect jobs, how do we ensure that people have income, that they can go and spend, get money back into the economy, to prevent the economic decline that we're seeing at the moment. On the other hand, you have businesses that are saying, there's just no activity taking place. People are not trading, and this is not only relevant to the liquor or tobacco industry where there are prohibitions. all industries in all shapes and forms are affected by this. And they're saying, under these circumstances where business is down, how do we protect the business? How do we position the business in such a manner that once this situation turns around, which we all believe it will come, it's just a matter of time. How do we position the business that we still have a business at that stage, so that we can continue to protect the people's jobs that are employed by the organization? And critically, how do we optimally place the business in a position to be able to pounce on those opportunities that are going to come once we are through this pandemic? So businesses are looking at restructuring their organizations. There is not a single business out there that I think is in the luxurious position of being able to say, this same structure and strategy that served us well over the past 10 years, served us well last year this time, is still appropriate under the current circumstances. So when, from the business school perspective, you say your structure should follow your strategy. We need to change our strategy in the light of what's happening around us. Do we still have the need for the same headcount that we needed 6 months ago? And most businesses are coming to the conclusion to say, no, we don't. Things such as working from home, have changed how we view our requirements from a headcount perspective, to use one example. So many businesses are coming to the conclusion to say we need to change our structure, and that necessitates reducing headcount. From a legal perspective, under South African law, there is no prohibition on staff redundancies during the lockdown period, during this period of COVID-19. And as undramatic as it may sound, in some jurisdictions some jurisdictions have imposed limitations on an organization's ability to make staff redundant during this period. South Africa is not one of those jurisdictions. An employer can still legitimately, lawfully, and fairly terminate staff because of redundancies or its operational requirements. What we have is various levels of government funding being made available. And although we haven't seen any redundancies coming before the Labour Court, where the Labour Court had to consider redundancies made during this period, just because of the nature and the time period that it takes for dispute resolution to be finalized, we anticipate that when these redundancies that arose during COVID-19 are going to get before the Labour Court, we think that the court is going to have a more stringent look at how employers made staff redundant during this period, considering, for instance, the availability of government funding. So an employer has a general duty under South African law to consider all alternative short of termination when it makes staff redundant. And certainly when we advise our clients, we say to them, have you considered the impact of the TERS funding? And can you justify that, notwithstanding the TERS funding, your structural needs in the business, or your financial needs, or both, or a combination of it, still warrant that you reduce your headcount? So although we haven't a prohibition on employee terminations during the COVID-19 period, unlike in some other jurisdictions, we do anticipate that the court will not just readily accept this. What we've certainly seen as far as employment termination is concerned, colloquially, when we chat to colleagues, when we consult with clients, there seems to be a reduction in terminations for misconduct. It seems that staff members are by and large being more compliant and avoiding getting themselves in a position where they can be fired, for misconduct. Because of what's happening around us. All of us can see that if you're going to get terminated during this period here, there is very little chance of you walking into another meaningful job, in the short term. So this is the time for you to hang on to your job and not do anything that's going to put you on the radar. But we also see that where employers are saying, I need to reduce my headcount. The structure that I had previously is not serving my business needs anymore. How do I reduce the headcount to get to the optimal position? A number of employers are saying, this is the time for us to critically look at those employees who are underperforming and actively start managing their performance. So as whereas previously we had the luxury of being able to bring people on board and take a more longer term view as to how long it will take us to turn bad performers around, I see many organizations now saying, we just don't have that luxury anymore. And before we go into a large scale redundancy process, let's make sure we terminated those employees who are just not performing within the business, so that we do that as a first port of call before we get to a point where we need to make staff redundant as a rule. I mean, what we're seeing, and when we speak to colleagues in other countries, I was on the call with colleagues from our Amsterdam and from our German offices last week. And certainly what we're seeing there is, and they are a month or two ahead of us in the business process, considering where they were on the COVID-19 scale. All of them are engaged in large-scale redundancy processes. So what we're already starting to see in South Africa has been happening in the northern hemisphere, for the past month or two. And all indications are, if we're trying to do some horizon gazing here, is that this is what's going to keep us busy in South Africa, for the foreseeable future. Large businesses out there are by and large going to say, this is the time for us to optimize our structure, make use, having made use of whatever is available locally from government. We now need to make sure that we optimize our structure and are in a position to not only see through this period, but once opportunities come around, which they will, our business is in the position to pounce on those.
Fantastic. Thanks, Johan. I'm now going to play a video from Joseph Muntisetsi to give the union perspective about exactly the kind of thing that Johan has just been discussing. So if you'll allow me to share my screen in a second. Here we go. And there we go. Hello.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
No, fine.
Unfortunately, technical issues have gotten the better of us, so we'll have to just do a recording, and then we'll share the recording in the webinar, if that's okay.
Okay, no, it's okay.
All right, so the one issue I would like to first start with, based on our previous chat, is you mentioned that, in addition to have to deal with Section 189s, you are also currently continuing with negotiations around salary increases. Can you give us some more information about that?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for the opportunity. Presently, when we spoke about salary increase, we are engaging several companies. First and foremost, we had the diamond industry, which will include De Beers and other companies. We are negotiating there. Our Deputy General Secretary, Comrade William Mabapa, is the chief negotiator. We are using Zoom for the negotiations as per the rules of the COVID-19 of social distance. As for now, I can say that things are going in the right way. We also had negotiation across the whole coal industry. As you shall understand that we are 90%. We are 90% majority in coal industry. The whole coal industry, which include Anglo-American, Seriti, and other companies, we have shared 3 office bearers. The General Secretary is taking Anglo-American, and the Deputy General Secretary is dealing with other companies, and the Chairperson of Health and Safety also is engaging. First, we used to have these companies under Chamber of Mines. But because our bargaining council at Chamber of Mines is not statuted, meaning that it's not a bargaining council which is been designed according to Labor Relations Act, this company has pulled out from Chamber of Mines, which means then we have to negotiate as an individual company. So we are very much stretched in terms of engaging in negotiations.
Is there not a challenge from the employers to say, look, COVID-19 has put pressure on our cash flows and our revenues, so the whole subject of increases is a big challenge that they're not willing to engage on?
Well, of course, you know that the employer's attitude always will be to take advantage of whatever comes across in order to avoid to comply. with their mandate according to Labor Relations Act. That is the main excuse. Once we open negotiations, they would be saying that, look, we don't selling, we have not been operating for long, so you can check our balance sheet. We totally does not have money. Why, if we can postpone this negotiation for next time so that we can be able to talk when we have made some profit and so on. But as we know that there's a trade union, our main core of existence is to make sure that our members are getting what is due for them. We don't budge in terms of the salary increase. We are engaging whatever percentage, the ideal percentage that we want it. And I think as time goes by, I will then share with you as to across the coal industry how much percentage we have been able to get from the collective bargaining and also from the diamond industry.
Okay. And then I suppose on the other side is that you are having organizations that are really struggling with the pandemic, not only in terms of the health issues on site and keeping employees healthy, they are also really having to retrench employees. How is NUM responding to that need of companies that are really not surviving financially?
Well, we are facing a major problem when it comes to the issue of Section 189. I can say that the most disappointing company is the company called VMR, Village Main Reef, VMR. Which is operating in Matlosana. Matlosana is Blackstop in the northwest. It has taken the mines that traditionally belongs to Anglo-Gold Ashanti, which was part of Anglo-American before, a restructuring or unbundling of 1998. So this company, it has taken a decision of retrenching more than 6,000 workers, of which it will be left with lesser workers than those they are retrenching. Our problem is that gold now is doing very well in the international market, and again the rent is low. So wherever you sell gold in the international market, you gain because gold is higher in price, and also when then you change money from dollars into rand, you gain a lot of money. So we don't see the reason why these people want to retrench more workers than the one that will be left in the company. As when we engage with them about this issue, they don't want to understand. So our case now is at Labour Court. We have interdicted the Section 189 because we did not agree to the number of workers that are going to be retrenched. Because out of this 6,000 something workers, NUM has a membership of 4,900. So it is not something that we can take light. So the process is at Labour Court. We have another company called Kangra. It's a coal company which is operating in KZN and Mpumalanga. This one, it has said that their problem was that they did not have an internal market in the country. They are not selling coal to Eskom or to any organization in the. So they depended in outside market, China and India and other countries. So that market, because of COVID-19, has just dried up. No one is looking for their coal, so they can't cope with the situation. Therefore, they are retrenching. But it has been clear from our leadership, from KZN that these people are lying. They still have a market, but what they want to do is to reduce as much work. They want to retrench the whole workers so that they can start anew with lesser conditions, to bring subcontractors who can be able to hire the same workers under very, very low conditions, salaries, and also conditions like your pension fund and also medical aid. So we also appeal to the Department of DMR to assist us through Section 52. Now we agreed at a level of DMR that they should stop retrenching. But you know what they do now? They went back and went down to our members and say, because your union is saying they don't want retrenchment, it's fine. For now, we have a budget to pay you your retrenchment package. But if they do this, then we are going to put the mine under liquidation. And when under liquidation, you must know that we are going to get nothing. So subsequent to that, then the members rise against our leadership in the province to say that they want their packages. So we succumbed because nowadays we're facing a lot of problems. If you try to be hard on this issue and the people lose their retrenchment package, some of them have worked for that company for 30 years. You can imagine how much they have to get. And then tomorrow when the company is under liquidation, they can even go out and burn your house. And it's a problem. So we have agreed that, well, let the people get their package. So this is we had a company again, which is called CHRO, which still our leadership are engaged on Section 189, but at least they are moderate. They are not hard on us.
Okay, and I suppose lastly, you've spoken to some very difficult and conflict-ridden negotiations that you seem to be having there. What is the advice you can have for companies that are looking to retrench and have to deal with unions like yourself? What is the right way to go about it?
Well, I think the right way to go about engaging on the issue of retrenchment is to be as transparent as you can, to show how much are you getting in terms of making profit or not making profit. This is very important for a company when it is engaging the union in terms of Section 189, because the union is also an organization that understands whenever we are engaged, we are able to talk to our members to say, you can see the situation, and then what do we do? Because we, as the trade union, we operate by what is called bottom up. We take mandate from our members. We cannot make decision on top. But I mean, if the company is transparent, very clear, I hope there was another company which was called Baffles late in 2007, when I was still the regional secretary of Matlosane in the Northwest. The chief negotiator said, the 10% that you are looking for, Joseph, if I'm going to put it, and 6 months down the line will be closed. And I tried to convince workers in a stadium to say, but why can't we accept this 5% so that we can sustain the mine for long? Then the workers said, we want our 10%, you see? And I can't do anything. I have to go back to negotiation and say, we want 10%. and 10% was indeed put as an increase. And 6 months down the line, the mine collapsed, and at least the workers bought their retrenchment package, and the mine, as I'm speaking to you, is closed. It is no longer operating.
Sure.
So that's how we operate.
Okay.
But if you are very clear, you are transparent enough, because that man, Dick Hoops, who was negotiating for that company, he came with the whole information of the company. I can even see that, no, this company is really facing problems.
Okay, so transparency is the main thing. Okay, Joseph, thank you for making yourself available. We've spoken for about 15 minutes now, and I think that's a good portion for us to play for the attendees of the webinar. Unfortunately. All right. Well, that's it. That's everything from Joseph. You've heard his views. Before we continue, I'd like to encourage all the attendees to please get some questions going in the chat for the Q&A session that is going to come around 10 to with 10 minutes left of the webinar. So back to the discussion. AB, what are your thoughts on what Ndate Joseph has said?
Yeah, Sungula, good morning, and good morning again to everyone. Of course, very interesting views that are shared by Joseph. In any restructuring exercise, you have disparate interests by different groupings that you engage with. So, in the first instance, you will have a union whose primary interest is how do we secure the livelihood, or how do we secure the jobs that our members have. And in securing the jobs, obviously, you are securing continued membership. You have, in the mining space, you have the DMR, which is an interested party. And as Joseph rightly points out, Section 52 of the MPRDA allows, the DMR to assist with processes of this nature. Interestingly, if you are in a mining space, you also have the community, because most of the mines operate within spaces where there is a very close interface with the communities. So the crux of any restructuring exercise is to find a way of balancing all these disparate interests, and in the end, get everyone to appreciate, firstly, why it is critical to undertake a restructuring exercise, and secondly, how do we minimize the impact of the restructuring exercise. I must admit that with all the restructuring exercises that I've done in the last number of years, one of the cardinal points is always, how do we avoid it? How do we avoid getting into a space where we're having to retrench? It isn't a nice experience to go through a restructuring exercise. It isn't a nice experience to look somebody in the eye and tell them that they're out of a job. But what is very, very important, and I've learned over the years, is absolutely what Joseph is talking about. Let's get a lot more transparent, because in being a lot more transparent about the challenges that we face, I have found that it is easier to get people to understand where you're coming from, and to get people to understand why it is so crucial for you to undertake a restructuring exercise. So transparency, absolutely critical. But also what I have found to be quite useful is going to a process with an open mind. So in other words, you're not going into the process with the retrenchment being the only thing that you are looking at. You go into a process because you are sitting with a particular problem, and you go into a process open to whatever inputs, whatever thoughts that might come through the process from the people that you're engaging with. And I found that the more you engage, the more easier it is to find solutions that you might not have thought of. So the one thing that we always do as leaders is to think that we've got it all figured out. And it's not always the case, right? You engage with your stakeholders because, yes, you might have thought it through. And it is possible that in the engagements, you are finding more and more ideas that you may not have thought of in the past. And that way, it becomes a process which ensures, one, that the views of all the stakeholders have been heard, two, that you have endeavored and you can demonstrate that you've done everything possible to avoid having to retrench anyone, and three, that the measures that you have put in place have indeed helped you to mitigate the impact of the restructuring. To the extent that you are able to do that, and to the extent that you're able to approach a process with that open mind, I have found that it becomes a lot easier to go through what is perhaps one of the most difficult conversations to have within any organization. And I'm yet to find an organization that says, we thrive on doing restructuring, or we thrive on getting to reduce the number of people that are employed. And as Johan pointed out earlier, South Africa is sitting with a massive problem of unemployment. We are over 30% unemployment. And we realize, of course, as businesses, that with South Africa having all these structural problems, it becomes a lot more difficult for you to run a business. And it becomes so critical for you as a business to play your part as well in helping to resolve some of these South Africa incorporated challenges. So you do everything within your means to try and ameliorate the pressure that our people are feeling. And why am I saying this? At times we think that you are sort of immune from the challenges that we see in our communities. We're not. To the extent that we still have communities that are struggling, that are not sustainable, they do impact on your sustainability as a business. And therefore, it is in our interest to ensure that we are able to contribute as much as possible in that regard. So in the end, Sungula, it's important to bring the parties together. It's important to be open in the conversation. It's important to be transparent. And it's important to do everything possible to mitigate the negative impact of any restructuring exercise.
Thank you for that, AB. Johan, before I come to you on your response to Joseph's thoughts, I'd like to publish a poll here to the attendees to find out what is the landscape looking like among those who are present today. The poll is about what is the extent of the threat of retrenchments impacting you. And the options are that, it's a reality that is currently underway. The other option is that, you're concerned, but the company has not indicated any intention to retrench. And the last is that you are fortunate to be in a position that retrenchment is not on the cards. We'll come back to analyze those responses after Johan gives us his take on what Joseph has said. Johan?
Sure. Thank you very much. And I listened with interest to Joseph and AB. I echo your comments and sentiments as well. I must say to you, and this comes difficult to me because I cut my teeth in the trade union environment. I'm an ex-trade unionist, and I have a very cynical view as to the state of health of organized labor at the moment. When I hear things such as, our members demand 10% and that's what we're going to get, we're not going to back down from that. For me, I don't think there could be a worse time to have an intransigent attitude as labor representing workers. And I've seen it. I mean, the example that Joseph gave there of a company saying, guys, if this is what if we have to capitulate and give you what you're asking, within 6 months, this business is going to go under. I have a number of examples of clients who's been exactly in that sort of position, where, it's not the state of trade unionism, it's not like, it's not an excuse in my view, with the greatest respect, to say that this is the nature of trade unionism. It's about bottoms up democracy and we do what our members mandate us to do. we don't have a difficulty with democracy in the trade union movement. What we have a difficulty with is leadership. We need leaders to say to members, guys, but this is the time for us to play the long game here, to say that first and foremost what we need to do is to secure jobs, and in that process we may have to make some compromises that are not comfortable and that we don't want to do at this juncture. Unfortunately, what I see in many organizations is that there's a lack of partnership between business and labor for various reasons, and I'm not saying that it's a one-sided blame game there. There are reasons on both sides as to why that relationship is not ideal. But unfortunately, what we're seeing, if you look at the statistics, cold and clinical stats, trade unionism is on the decline in South Africa, save for a couple of industries where there's still very active membership and within the trade unions. By and large, workers are questioning the need as to whether or not they belong to a trade union. What's the value of that? And that manifests itself in an existential battle, between the trade union movement for membership. And in my view, that results in attitudes like this, to say that when our members say that we demand 10%, irrespective of whether it's a good, bad, or indifferent idea, that is what we're going to deliver on. Because if we don't do that, they're going to go to trade union B, and trade union B will assist them to do that. Instead of saying, guys, we have a better insight into what's going on here. And as your leaders, we're saying to you, this is not the time for us to have that battle and to have that fight. But, this is not about union bashing. This is about me saying to you as a practitioner, I have serious concerns as to how we deal with this sort of discussion, in the context of redundancies. Because if the attitude during redundancies is that I disagree that the business has a valid operational need in order to make staff redundant, that puts you in a difficult position right from the outset. And I agree with AB 100%. Transparency, it's one of those key things. We often say to our clients, the best thing that you can do during a redundancy consultation process is to ensure that staff buy into that. So put a lot of time and effort into that preparation phase before you have that first engagement with staff, so that you can get that message across to the staff members to say, this is not a knee-jerk reaction. This is not us taking the path of least resistance and trying to save money, where we are going to get the least resistance from people. This is us having contemplated this thing, considered all the options that are available to us exhaustively, and having to come to this really difficult conclusion that the best way for us to manage this hemorrhage, is to look at our headcount reduction. If you get the buy-in from staff, your subsequent consultation process is going to be a much easier, more productive buy-in sort of a process where you can get optimal results, rather than you're confronted with a group of employees saying, but we just don't believe this management team. What they are doing is they're just trying to save cost at our expense. Meanwhile, everybody is still getting bonuses and salary increase and share schemes, and now they're looking at us, the lower paid workers, in order to try and cut our headcount or reduce our salaries. So I really echo AB sentiments there. I have sympathy for Joseph's position, but unfortunately, I think Labour has to take a lot of the responsibility as to how do we get out collectively, how do we get out of this mess that we're in at the moment.
Fantastic. Thanks, Johan. All right, coming back to the poll, the results are in, and it's not looking good, to be honest. Even in this small sample size of about 160 attendees, we have 45%, almost half, saying that Section 189 or Section 189A processes have already begun within the organization, which is heartbreaking, really. 25% have said they are concerned that retrenchments may be on the card, but the company hasn't communicated any such intention. And lastly, we have quite a fair amount, about a third of attendees saying they're not concerned. Companies are operating as per usual. Johan, how does these numbers compare to the experience of your clients at the moment?
Sure. So certainly I can say to you, just without empirical facts, but just based on what is on my desk at the moment, the sort of things that we're dealing with as a team, both locally and within the region. Very few organizations are either not engaged in some sort of organizational restructuring, or are not contemplating, whether they should go through that or whether they should implement in the short term. So this is the reality for many businesses. The sort of just additional aspects. I don't want to belabor the point. Everybody's comfortable or understand, the underlying needs during this period as to why we need to engage in restructuring. But some of the things that we often don't think about are these, the intangible effect of a redundancy and restructuring within an organization. There's some really good research out there on that as to what happens to the staff that remain behind during a redundancy exercise. There's some data that was made available where 76% of staff that remain behind the organization said that they were more productive or were less productive or felt less productive following such an exercise. The psychological impact.
We seem to have lost Johan there. In the meantime,
it's a very difficult thing to show on a spreadsheet on the bottom line. So when we look at reducing headcount, we see the direct benefit we're going to get from reducing our labor budget. But what is the secondary and subsequent impact on this? And my advice to employers out there is bear that in mind. Consider the soft impact of redundancy, the impact on those who remain behind. Businesses, by and large, who have gone through redundancy exercises have higher turnover once the market picks up because people feel less loyal towards the brand. That is a statistical fact. You've got higher absenteeism, where staff are more inclined to take their sick leave because they don't feel, okay, listen, I just have the sniffles. Let's forget about COVID-19 still, but I just have the sniffles and I'm going to go to work because I'm committed to the cause. You have higher presenteeism, where staff are at work, but either just not productive or they're making mistakes. I mean, there's some statistics about the increase in number of work mistakes being made after an exercise like this. And of course, there's some US statistics also available about the propensity of organizations that have gone through reduction exercises or redundancy exercises who then end up in Chapter 11 bankruptcy proceedings or in this perpetual motion of doing a restructuring upon restructuring, upon restructuring, upon restructuring. And I mean, the damaging impact that has on the business as a whole. So if you want to create a winning organization, if you have to go through a restructuring exercise, and most businesses unfortunately do, get that over and done with as soon as possible and make sure that you keep the staff on board with you, keep them motivated, look after those people that remain behind the organization, get them counseling, get them all sorts of assistance that you can, and try and put this process behind you as soon as possible. Don't get lulled into this position where that restructuring exercise went well, let's go through another one because these are the benefits that we got through it, for what that may be worth.
Thanks, Johan. AB, can you reflect on those comments from Johan and perhaps shed light on your experience at Daimler at the moment?
Yeah, thanks, Sungula. Firstly, the poll isn't surprising at all for me. I would have expected that it would be like that, and I say that because I believe that what COVID has done is to enunciate a problem that we already had in our economy, and a problem that the world economy as a whole already had. And depending on the industry that you're in, I mean, if I look at the auto industry, for example, and the industry globally is going through a massive transformation, and you see more and more electrification of the engine. You see more and more people questioning whether they shouldn't be in shared mobility as opposed to buying cars and so on and so forth. So you have the auto industry in that phase of transformation, and you have then on top of that COVID, which really puts a lot more pressure on business or on the industries. So I'm not surprised at all with the poll numbers that we are seeing. The second point that I would like to make, and Johan, you make a very, very good point about getting into the process and completing as soon as you can, because 189 processes by their very own nature are quite disruptive, and if they are not managed well, they have the propensity to destroy the value that you have in your business. So you want to go into a process, you want to do it well, and you want to ensure that you take people along with you, you make people to understand why it's important for you to run through this process, you provide all the support mechanisms in place. And in my experience, you ensure that you communicate. So you can never, stop communicating while you go through this process. That helps you in ensuring that you get people to move along with you. And that also helps you that in the end, you want to ensure that those people that remain behind, painful and difficult as it may be for them, are able to step up post the restructuring process. And I have found that in having a very well thought, structured, deliberate communication process, you get to build on the trust levels that people have of you as a leadership team, and that helps you in the end, because in any restructure you are almost disrupting the system, as it were, and you need to reset it at some point when you complete this process. And the most difficult thing that can ever happen to you is to try reset with people that you have lost along the way, and people that are no longer with you. So that's why it's so important, so critical that you are able to communicate throughout the process. And as I said, for us, we are seeing exactly the same pain that everyone else is feeling everywhere across the world. We are having to manage in this very, very volatile, uncertain world, where there is a more pressure in terms of what sort of cars do we put out, how do we electrify the cars, how do we reduce carbon footprint, and so on and so forth. And with that also is how do we remain competitive? And I always say, especially to our union colleagues, that if you compare South Africa with the rest of the world, and if you compare South Africa to countries such as Hungary, countries in the East, and you compare our level of competitiveness, you then have to keep asking yourself, how do we continue to promote South Africa as an investment destination with the poor level of competitiveness that we're seeing? And it's presenting itself also in our industry, and it's something that we need to continue keeping a very close eye on. What helps us is being part of this big family. You can't fault us with regard to quality, you can't fault us with regard to many other elements, but where it becomes a bit challenging is how do we maintain the same level of competitiveness that you see elsewhere. And that is, for me, the biggest challenge that South Africa faces. It's not just a critical issue for the auto industry, but it's a critical issue for the rest of the South African economy. How do we remain competitive, and how do we ensure that post-COVID we are able to nip some of the structural issues in the bud, and we are able to create a very, very efficient economy that is delivering value for our country. So we are feeling the pain. We are having to look at a number of things that are critical to ensure that we remain competitive, to ensure that we remain a viable business. And in the end, for me, two critical things are important. How do we ensure the sustainability of the business? And how do we ensure that we are equally, in the current environment, safeguarding the health and safety of our people, and we ensure that we are able to maintain as many of the jobs as possible moving forward. The reality that we do face is that it is a very, very challenging environment. The market is quite volatile at the moment, and therefore it's something that we need to learn how to operate within. And none of the companies are immune from this. And I think that if you talk to, whether you talk to us, you talk to any other company in the auto sector, whether you talk to any other industry that may not necessarily be impacted by the limitations that they have today, whether it's the alcohol industry or the tobacco industry, everyone else is in the same boat. And the difference this time is that we are not able to come out of it as we did in 2008. And this is going to be a long haul. And in this long haul, we need to make sure that if you do end up in a restructuring, you do it as quickly as you can, and you do it caringly. You do it with as much empathy as is necessary, and you do it in a manner that ensures that you do carry people with you, because in the end, post the restructuring, you will need your people to reset, and you will need your people to get the business back on track.
Thank you, AB. All right, we're going to start the Q&A portion of the webinar now. There are quite a number of questions, understandably, because of the subject matter that we're covering today. So I'm going to ask that the panelists keep it short so that we can get to as many questions as possible. The first, also, before I move on, we will endeavor to have all your questions answered. If not in the webinar, we will send them off to the panelists and get back to you via email. So don't worry if your question doesn't get answered in this particular session. The first question I'd like to ask, I'll direct this one to you, Johan, is from Mapula Molefiane. And she says, I assume it's a her, she says, with COVID and financial strains that the companies are facing, how can you restructure with a view to negotiate salary cuts instead of retrenching employees?
Okay, so this is the dilemma that employers face in terms of Section 187 of the Labour Relations Act, you know, where a demand on a matter of mutual interest cannot lead to the termination of employees. But what you can do validly and legitimately as an employer is to say that I no longer have a valid business need for role X with the accompanying terms and conditions associated with that. And there's been some recent Labour Court authority on this point as well. So considering our time constraints, I would just say to the practitioners out there, consider the Friars Metal judgment, the Algorex judgment, and there's a judgment which I'm embarrassed to say escaped my name now from 2 years ago, dealing on the exact same issue as well. But it is possible for a business to say that my business needs, my operational requirements dictate that I no longer have a valid business need for these roles with the accompanying job spec and remuneration attached to that. My business need is now for a different organizational structure where I may have similar or different roles with different salary attached to that. And that is a valid operational requirement, and you can channel that into a Section 189 process and see it to its finality. And if the parties are unable to reach agreement on that, then terminate employees and appoint people in terms of the new structure. That's a short answer to it. It's a minefield, but it can be navigated. Thank you.
Another question here is I'll direct it to AB. It's from Verishka Baiju. The question is, how do you motivate the remainder of staff after the retrenchment process? We've already touched on survivor's guilt and how retrenchments can really erode the culture of an organization, leading to presenteeism, absenteeism, and all sorts of non-performance issues. Once you're at that point, what are the kind of solutions that you can implement to just get back everybody on side? AB?
Yeah, as I said earlier, it starts with you while you are still in the restructuring exercise, and it starts with the extent of transparency that you have exhibited during the consultation process. It starts with the communication that I spoke about, which is absolutely critical for you to ensure that you take people along with you. And it also starts with you during that process, realizing that the restructuring is not the end of your company. You do need people once you have gone through the restructuring exercise. And therefore, once you are through that, of course, your employee wellness programs become absolutely critical to keep people motivated and to keep people focused. And in the end, it's really in how we as leaders show up during these periods, and it's how we as leaders demonstrate the care that we have for our people and ensuring that we do take people along with us along the way. So it's not something that I would say you only do at the end of the restructuring exercise. You have to do that while you are in the restructuring exercise. You have to realize while you are in the process that you will at some point finish the process, and you will at some point need to move on and need to get people to work with you in building a sustainable business.
Thanks, Abi. I have another question here from Esha Dasarat, and she says every company is trying to emerge with a more robust and multi-skilled workforce. How does the last in, first out principle come into play with this in mind? Either of you are happy to take this one.
Yeah.
You're on mute there, Johan. AB?
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
Sorry, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'll gladly share with you, and I'd love to hear what AB says as well. Look, LIFO, our courts have said over a number of years, is an acceptable default position. It is fair and objective, and there's no difficulty in implementing LIFO. But it's not by any stretch of imagination the touchstone or the gold standard when it comes to selection criteria. As a matter of fact, most employers that I'm aware of, and certainly the advice that we give to our clients, is that you want to use a combination of best competency fit, and you want to be able to select the best employees to take the organization going forward. It doesn't make sense, to me to say that, you're only going to retain staff that's been with you for a long period and award the loyalty, but at the expense of the business going forward. You can have a combination of these things. You say, listen, I have a score sheet of factors that I'm going to take into consideration. How you are fit from a competency and skills and qualification perspective for the new role, length of service, disciplinary record. There are a couple of factors that you can factor into that. But I would guard against using LIFO as the standard by which we need to retain staff. If it's my business and I say I had 10 staff members, my operational needs are that I can only take 5 going forward. There's no doubt in my mind whatsoever that I'm going to pick the best 5 staff members in order to take that business forward, because that's how I ensure the survival of my business and put it in the best position possibly to grow going forward from there. So you can consult with staff members on your selection criteria and reach agreement on any selection criteria whatsoever, as long as it's not discriminatory. If you don't reach agreement with staff on selection criteria, then the court will test the selection criteria that you as the employer dictate, and it will say, were those criteria fair and objective? And provided you can pass the fair and objective criteria, you can implement whatever selection criteria you want to, even if you don't reach agreement with the affected staff on those selection criteria.
Yeah, maybe just one comment on that is fully agree with you, with you, Johan. My approach has always been to have a matrix, or rather a combination of elements, and of course the most critical for me is best fit. Do you have the competency, the skill sets that you need to take you forward? And assuming that I've got 3 people and checked against all the other elements, they all tick, the box, then of course LIFO could be an element, but LIFO on its own isn't necessarily completely helpful, and I would only use it as one of the key elements that one is applying to arrive at the selection.
Okay.
Agree 100%.
Fantastic. There was another question from, let's see here. I think, Johan, you did respond to Mpho Motsekwa's question about minority unions insisting on facilitation. So, Mpho, you can refer to the chat for that. A question from Florence Chikorore, sorry if I got that wrong. It's a question around change management responsibilities. Does this fall squarely on HR practitioners, given the impact on the business landscape? AB?
Not entirely, but of course, HR practitioners generally run the restructuring processes, and therefore, in running a restructuring exercise, you want to make sure that you have thought it through correctly, you have business involved and all that, and you want to make sure that you've got the necessary change management processes in place. Again, going back to what I said, remember that you will get to the end of the process at some point, and you do need to ensure that you are able to help the business to, one, make the changes that you implemented stick, and two, that you are able to reset the organization post the restructuring process. So HR has a very, very important role. HR practitioners, rather, have a very, very important role to play in ensuring that we are able to manage this transition very, very well.
All right, fantastic. We've got a couple of seconds left, and I'd like to thank the panelists for joining us today. And just to wrap up the webinar, we do have another one next week where the subject will be Women Executives, Be True to Yourselves, which will be hosted by my colleague Georgina, and have a number of HR leaders who will be leading that one. So please be sure to join that webinar next week. Thereafter, on the 12th of August, we have Self-Care in an HR Crisis, a conversation that will be led by Sun International HR Director Werner Robson, who will share her lessons on lockdown. It's very interesting what happened to Werner. They were, during the consultation with employees, her personal mobile number was sent out to all employees at Sun International. And you can just imagine the kind of headache that she had to deal with after that. So that will be a very interesting one. But that's it for today. Thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate this discussion. I think there was definitely a lot of value from everybody that attended this webinar today. The video will be sent to all the registrants, so don't worry about that. Within the next hour or two, you will have a video in your inbox. And that's all. Thank you, AB and Johan, for making yourself available today. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys.